Have you ever been in a situation where you felt like the people around you were all completely missing the point? This is about 15 years ago now. I had just been hired by a church in Vancouver to be the youth pastor. And the church had no youth group, or almost no youth group. So they had hired me and they said, why don't you try and get a youth group somehow? Go find some teenagers and bring them in. And so I said, sure, that sounds like a great idea. So what I did was I decided to pray. And I prayed, and there were a few youth, and I prayed, and then all of a sudden, people started showing up. Teenagers started showing up that I didn't expect from the neighborhood. Only they were all a bunch of really bad people. And I'm not kidding. They were bad people, weren't they, Amber? They were not quite a gang, but they were close. They were close. They did some gang signs sometimes. They destroyed our church property regularly. They slashed my bike tires once. They did drugs. They drank, all underage. And about 30 of them all showed up at once. 30! 30, and I had no youth leaders. It was just me in front of 30 hoodlums, bad people, waving the Jesus flag every week and trying to get him to turn toward him. And after, fast forward a while, a couple of years, and I had spent a lot of time, in particular with two guys from that group. And they had grown immensely. In fact, it had been really hard going until one day one of them had a dramatic experience of meeting God, of experiencing God's Holy Spirit in his life. He had come to me and he said, there's something going on. It feels like sort of it's in my chest or in my heart. It's when we're singing or when we're praying, and it feels a little bit like a fire. He said, what is that? I said, oh, that's God. That's the Holy Spirit. And he was super excited by this, and so they started to grow by leaps and bounds, and eventually they started coming to church on Sunday mornings. And that's where the real problems started happening. So one day I'm at the front door hanging out. The two of them are out in the parking lot and they're talking. And what I'm seeing at that moment is I'm thinking about all the amazing things that God has done in their lives. I'm thinking about how God has broken into their lives and transformed them, really, turning them from a path that was going to lead to death and destruction. And now instead of breaking stuff and beating people up, which is literally what they were doing, they're in church volunteering and they're showing up on Sunday morning. They're reading their Bibles. They're trying to become more like Christ. And my heart is full of joy as I'm watching this. And then a mom comes up to me who's part of our church. And she says this, she says, Pastor, did you know that those two boys are smoking? And honestly, until that very moment, it had not even occurred to me that the two of them were smoking in the parking lot as I was watching them. I was so full of joy over what God was doing in that moment. And she wanted me to go and kick them. She said, that's a bad example for our kids. And it is a bad example for our kids, isn't it? And she wanted me to actually go and remove these two from the property, get them out of here, kick them out, or get them to change their behavior right now. That's what she wanted. And in my mind, I thought, wow, she's in one way she's right, but in another way, she has so dramatically missed the point. Today, we're going to be talking about what should we do with bad people. That's the title of the message today, is Bad People. And what are we going to do with them? That's the problem with life, right? Is we're all right, but we keep running into these bad people all over the place. And what are we going to do with them? Tie them up? I don't know. So we're going to talk about that. We're going through a series of messages right now in the book of Mark in the Bible. It's the story of Jesus' life. And we're going through this book. It's called Sudden Life. We're looking at what Jesus did. We're going to do a little bit of a recap right now. We just started the series last week. Let's go to that next slide, and we'll recap some of the things that we learned last week about the book of Mark. And then we're going to talk today about the end of chapter 1, and about chapter 2 and chapter 3. We're going to go through all of that. We're going to look at how Jesus deals with bad people. All right, so here we go. Book of Mark. Mark, the guy who wrote it, we said last week, if you want to see more about this, hear more about this, look at last week's message. He lived in Rome at the end of his life when he wrote this book, and he collected sermon material from Peter, who was one of Jesus' best friends. Peter had been an eyewitness to most everything Jesus had done. And as he delivered sermons in the city of Rome, Mark wrote down notes from these, and eventually he writes them down in a book. He wrote this book by the 60s, by sometime in the 60s, not the 1960s, the actual 60s. Maybe he wrote it in the 50s, we're not exactly sure. Mark, as you read through this book, which I'm encouraging everyone to do, read through it over and over. It's not long. It's a very fast read. If you read it again and again, I guarantee you will get a lot out of it as we go through this series. Mark is an action writer. He is not boring at all. It goes from action to action. He uses the word immediately or suddenly over and over again. We're going to see that today. Suddenly this happens, and then this happens. He doesn't give a whole lot of commentary on what's happening. He just says, he shows you what happened. And he's trying to get you, and that's what we're trying to do in these messages. He's trying to bring you into what it felt like to be there. That's where he's trying to get us to go. And so we're going to try and get there today. The book is structured around two secrets. The first half of the book is structured around the secret of who is Jesus. And then the second half of the book is structured around the secret of what is Jesus going to do now that we know who he is. We saw last week at the opening of the book, Mark gives us this sneak preview. He tells you, the reader, exactly who Jesus is. But no one in the story knows yet who he is. Who he is the Christ, the one who is going to come into the world to save it. He is the Son of God. Those are the two things that Mark says about him. He is the Christ, the anointed one of God, and he is the Son of God. Okay, last week we talked about chapter 1. Jesus shows up on the scene and he starts blowing things up. Not literally, he's not a terrorist, but things are just changing all over the place. People don't know what to do with him. He says, he gives this sermon, and his first sermon is, do you remember what it was? The time has come. The kingdom of God is right here. So repent, change the way that you're thinking about life, and believe the good news. That was his first message. And we compared it last week to teenagers throwing a party while their parents are away. You remember that? Teenagers throwing a party while their parents are away. The party gets really bad. Some of the people at the party are having a great time. It's the best time of their lives because they like to do the bad stuff. Some of the people at the party, the ones who threw it maybe, are worried about their house getting broken, and they're starting to wish there were a way out of this party, but it's out of control. And then all of a sudden, Dad comes home. Dad comes home. He comes home in disguise. He disguises himself as a teenager. He shows up in the house, and he says, the time has come. The party is over. The kingdom of Dad is here. Repent, rethink what you're doing right now, and believe the good news that this awful party is about to be destroyed. We said last week, we pushed that analogy a little bit further, and we said Dad is also the police commissioner. And he's got his police officers all surrounding the house. They're ready to take it out. But he's looking through the house. He's come in secretly to look through the house and say, who actually wants to get out of this party? Who here are the instigators, and they've allied themselves with all the bad stuff that's going on? That's what they want. But who here wants out? Who, when I come to them and say, there's a way out, is excited by that and is going to come with me? And he goes through the house finding these people, and he sends them out on the same mission to find more people who want to get out of the party before he brings in the police to arrest everyone. That was our image that we're holding for what Jesus is doing in this situation. We said after that in chapter 1, things start to get a little crazy. Jesus starts healing people left and right. He starts healing people who have diseases that they've had since birth. And then people who are on the margins, people who were maybe bad people or looked like they were mentally ill, they start acting very strange around Jesus. In fact, the way that the eyewitnesses described this is they said these people must have been possessed by something. Because when Jesus comes around them, they start screaming. And they say things like, "You are the Son of God. I know who you are. Have you come here to torture me?" Things start getting really weird. When Jesus shows up in church and he preaches, it's like night and day to what the regular teachers and preachers are doing in church. Everybody says, "There's never been a teaching like this. This is astonishing." When he speaks, it's like my whole life changes. And you can imagine, I feel a little bit bad for the preachers who were preaching every week in the synagogue in Capernaum, right? They're preaching every week and everyone's going to sleep while they preach. And then one day Jesus himself shows up to give a sermon in their church. And yeah, there's a big difference between the regular messages that they hear and what Jesus gives. And then in the sections we're looking at today, Jesus starts to do something very strange. He starts going after bad people. And by going after, I do not mean he starts running after them. He starts trying to kick them out or trying to change them or trying to reform them immediately. He starts trying to make friends, get close to bad people. People that you would not want to be around. Let's go to the next slide and let's talk about that for a minute. What do I mean by bad people? In the book of Mark, these people are described as sinners and tax collectors. We'll get to tax collectors in a couple minutes. But sinners, they're described as sinners. And the best way, I think, for us to understand that today is simply to say bad people. We don't talk about bad people too much, but we all know who they are, don't we? We know who the bad people are that we don't want to be around, and there are good reasons we don't want to be around them. So the first thing I'm going to say, what do I mean by bad people? People that you don't want to be around for good reasons. Bad people are people that you don't want to be around for good reasons. So let's list off what some of those reasons might be. Sick people. Why would you not want to be around sick people? Because you can get sick from them, right? That's legitimate. Especially in the first century, in the 30s, when there was no modern medicine and there wasn't even soap. I've been saying this in every message recently. I've been amazed by this, just thinking about the reality of what a world must have been like without soap. There's no soap at all, anywhere. It had never been invented. People kind of rubbed themselves with olive oil and then scraped it off. That was the best you could do. Okay? So you could get sick from these bad people. What about smelly people? How many of us like to be around people who really, really stink? That was most people in the first century since they didn't have soap. And that's why you get such things like really expensive perfume is something that comes up a number of times in the New Testament, because you got to wear some strong cologne to cover up all that smell. Okay? What about ugly people? Now, this is something we don't talk about. If someone is not attractive, we have a tendency to not like being around them as much. That is a sociological fact that has been studied extensively. It's just what human beings do. Now, we might try to not be like that, but it's true. We don't like to be around people who don't look good. Mean people. Why would you not want to be around mean people? Because they're mean. That one's obvious. Why would you not want to be around liars or cheaters? Okay, because they're going to do that to you. Think about someone who has lied to you or cheated you of something. What's your inclination toward them? You want to be around them? Absolutely you do not. What about exhausting people? People who just their very presence, for whatever reason, just, man, you are so tired after you have been around this person. You are not inclined to be around them again. Let's move on a little further. What about dangerous people? Okay, people like my youth group that I was talking about earlier. We don't want to be around dangerous people because they're dangerous. They might do something really bad to us. It's not wise to be around them. Smokers, maybe we don't want to get secondhand smoke, or maybe we just recognize that that's sort of an identity mark. If somebody smokes, they might do other stuff. Oh, I'm scared of them. What about strangers? Stranger danger is a big thing now, right? Don't talk to people you don't know. No, you should do that. Addicts. We definitely don't want to be around addicts. Thugs. The mentally ill, the homeless. Let's put up that next picture. Can I put up my thug picture? This is some thugs. Actually, these are some thugs from Spokane, Washington. If you've ever been to Spokane, it's a picture from 2017, downtown Spokane. Some thugs. This is kind of what my youth group looked like, actually. Maybe not quite. They took the bandana off when they came into church. Okay, but that's kind of what they looked like. Okay, back to the previous screen there. So thugs, mentally ill, not because we have anything against them, but it's hard to be around someone who's mentally ill. The homeless. Sometimes we don't want to be around homeless. We feel very uncomfortable. And what about this one? People who have done something wrong to you. That's really the bad people, isn't it? You know, right now, there's someone in your life who you have that feeling toward because they did something that you just wasn't right. How do you feel? Do you want to be around them? No, we don't want to be around the bad people. All right, so let's jump in. We're going to jump into the Gospel of Mark in chapter 2 here. And you've got some of this in your notes, on the back of your notes. We're going to read two sections. The first section, the end of chapter 1 is the first section. Mark chapter 1, and we're going to read starting here at verse 41. And we're going to see what Jesus does. This is right after he's been healing all these people in the city of Capernaum, and it was like the whole city brought people to his house, or the house he was staying at, so that he could heal them. Then he stayed up super late. He got up very early in the morning, and he kind of ran away from everyone. He went out into the wilderness where no one could find him. Peter and his friends had to actually go out and search for him. He said, we're not going to just stay in one place. We're going to go around to a bunch of different villages and towns, because that's why I've been sent. And then this is the very next thing that happens. He's out in the wilderness. He's apart from the cities right now. And we're going to see what happens next. He encounters someone who's got leprosy, a man with leprosy. So let's read that, starting at verse 40. A man with leprosy came to him and begged him on his knees, if you are willing, you can make me clean. Jesus was indignant. He was frustrated. Why would you ever say that to me? He reached out his hand and touched the man. I am willing, he said, be clean. Immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. Jesus sent him away at once with a strong warning. See that you don't tell this to anyone. Don't tell anyone that you've been healed. But go, show yourself to the priest and offer the sacrifices that Moses commanded for your cleansing as a testimony to them. Well, instead, the man went out and began to talk freely, spreading the news, and as a result, Jesus could no longer enter a town openly, but stayed outside in lonely places. Yet, the people still came to him from everywhere. This is an amazing story for a number of reasons. First of all, what is leprosy? I heard that question spoken a little bit as we read the story. Leprosy, many of you will know, but this is a disease that in this part of the world does not exist anymore. Praise God, and credit to modern medicine that it doesn't. But in this time, there was no cure for it. It's basically a disease where your skin and then parts of your body rot and fall off. It's awful, horrific, and ends in death. It's also contagious. And so, people who had it were ostracized. They were kicked out of towns for a very good reason, because other people are going to get this horrific disease from them. Now, imagine, though, that you are a person who has leprosy. You are a person who, you were living your regular life, you had family and friends, all of a sudden you got this disease, and your family and friends came to you and said, you must now leave everyone and live alone in the middle of nowhere. We'll try and bring you some food, but you can't even come close to us. We're going to set the food down and go away, and then you can come and get the food off of the ground. What would it feel like to be that person. It would feel like death. Not just physical death. It would feel like you had already died. Your relationships have already been cut off. You would feel so radically alone. You would feel like no one could ever possibly love or care about me. No one does care about me. Have you ever felt that way? This person comes to Jesus, and that is a bold move. You see, this person could be beaten just for coming near him, right? This person is endangering Jesus' life, if we think about it from a human perspective. This person is endangering Jesus' life by coming close to him, falling down on their knees before him, and daring to ask him to touch them. Not only was it dangerous from a standpoint of getting a disease, but this is also against the religious regulations. For the Jews had all these religious regulations about things that were clean and things that were unclean, and someone who had leprosy was definitely unclean. If you touched them, even if you didn't get sick from it, you had to go through an extensive process of ritually cleansing yourself before you were allowed to go back into the temple or go to church. So in asking this, what would normally happen is that if a person touched a leper, they were now considered unclean until they went through this whole process of being cleansed. But this leper has heard about Jesus and heard that there's something very different about him. He's able to heal people, and he's willing to heal people. And the leper says to Jesus, "Are you willing to touch me? I know if you're willing to do it, that you can make me clean. You can heal all of this disease." And Jesus gets mad at the leper. Do you see why? How could you possibly think? You see, the perspective that he's coming from is so different from the perspective of the world that he's living in. How could you possibly think that I would not be willing to cleanse you? How could you possibly think that I don't love you more than my own life? That's what he's saying by touching this person. He could die from this. Okay, we know he's the Son of God, and we know he's not going to die until the purpose for his life is fulfilled. But guess what? That's true of you too. You're not going to die until God decides that you're going to die. And so Jesus, in this dramatic act of risking his life, is angry. He's frustrated with this leper. How could you possibly think I would not touch you? I love you more than my own life. And he reaches out his hand and he touches this leper. And this is the first time the leper has been touched by another human being since they got the disease. And immediately, Mark says, remember he says this a lot. Immediately, I don't know if that meant like in 1 second or in an hour. It could be anything. Immediately his leprosy goes away and he's healed. Now this part's funny to me. Jesus then tells him, think about this for a minute. He's been healed of leprosy. His skin was falling off. His body parts were starting to fall off and rot. And now his skin is brand new, like a child's skin. He looks completely different than he did. And Jesus says, don't tell anybody. I give you a strong warning. Go back to your family, but don't tell them that you've been healed. I almost think, what is he joking with the leper? Are you kidding me? But he tells him to go back and offer sacrifices. I think he knows that the leper is going to go and tell everybody, but he's trying to get him not to spread the word too far because Jesus is trying to hold on to a secret at this point. And the secret is that he is more powerful than anyone the world has ever seen. The secret is what we already know, that he's the Son of God. He's the anointed one of God, the chosen one who will save the world. He's trying to keep too many people from knowing that because he knows some things are going to happen if people realize that that's the case. But what I want to get out of this is that feeling of the leper, and then I want to relate that to your life. We said that at the moment when the leper came up to Jesus and risked everything, risked being beaten, to ask Jesus to heal him, that leper had felt profoundly alone. That leper had felt like no one could possibly ever love him. No one would ever touch him again. He was cut off from everything. And what I want to ask is, have you ever felt that way? Don't raise your hand. Have you ever felt like you were beyond being loved or being cared for by anyone? Have you ever felt like who you are, the things that are wrong with you on the inside, made it so that even God couldn't really love you? Not you. With all your rotting filth on the inside that no one else sees, but that you know is there. I know that many of us, if not all of us, have felt that way. And here's what the book of Mark and what Jesus is screaming at us. When you feel that way, when you think about God and say, he could never love me, not with this garbage that I've got on the inside. He gets mad at you when you think that way. He says, are you kidding me? How could you possibly think that I don't love you more than my own life? I died for you on the cross and took on a punishment that you can't even imagine the depth of it. And you think that I can't love you because of that? Here's the first point to write down in your notes. No matter who you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what has happened to you, he is willing to touch you and make you clean. He is willing. You just got to believe it. Believe it enough to run up to him, fall on your knees, and ask him to, like that leper did. And you will find out that he is more loving than any human being has yet imagined. He is full of mercy and grace. Oh, man. That's a long one. We should give you a minute to write it down. No matter who you are, no matter what you have done, no matter what has happened to you, he is willing to touch you and make you clean. All right, we're going to skip a few things in chapter 2 because we just don't have time to go through it all, but read it. Chapter 2 is amazing. The next section that we're going to skip is the healing of the paralyzed man. A few weeks ago, maybe about a month ago, Tyler spoke on this. Go back and watch that message. Whatever is happening in your life, whatever situation you're in, the right thing to do is what? Take a step closer to God. Take a step closer to Jesus. That's the message from that section. We're going to jump into chapter 2 now. The next section, the second part for today, chapter 2, and this verse 13. We're going to start there. And this is the story of Levi, who is also called Matthew. He had two names. Many people had two names then. They had a name that was in Greek, a Greek name, and a name that was a Hebrew name. Okay, so this is a lot like maybe Chinese people today in North America will have two names, a Chinese name and an English name. Same thing. That's what's going on here. So Levi is his Hebrew name. All right, let's read through this, and we'll talk about tax collectors and bad people for a minute. Once again, Jesus went out beside the lake. It's also called the Sea of Galilee. A large crowd came to him, and he began to teach them. As he walked along, he saw Levi, the son of Alphaeus, sitting at the tax collector's booth. "Follow me," Jesus told him. And Levi got up and followed him. While Jesus was having dinner at Levi's house, many tax collectors and sinners were eating with him and his disciples, for there were many who followed him. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why? Why does he eat with a bunch of bad people?" On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "You have missed the entire point." No, he said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but to call sinners." I have not come to call the righteous, but I have come to call sinners. All right, who is Levi and what in the world is a tax collector? He's a little bit like, I said last week, the tax collectors in those times were a little bit like the mafia. That's not quite the right analogy. All week I struggled in this. I was praying to God, show me the right analogy. I got it. I got the perfect analogy for tax collectors. Are you ready? Here it comes. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to explain to you the rest of your life. You're going to know exactly what it was like to think about the tax collectors. This is how people thought about them back then, and you'll be able to interpret the Bible much better. Ready? Let's pull up the next slide. Bam. Buster's Towing in Vancouver. All right, now I know this is a little bit different in Surrey. Who tows your cars in Surrey if you get impounded? Unitow, yep. And so Unitow, but Buster's, I have more experience. Has anybody been busted by Buster's in Vancouver? Yeah, man, I hate Buster's. If you look on Google, they have 1.5 stars. I'm amazed they have 1.5 stars. How did they get that many stars? All right, so quick story. Amber one time parks in front of church. She's in front of our church. This was a while ago, a different church in Vancouver. She's parked on the side of the road. She realizes that she's too close to the corner, and that a bylaw officer has come by or whatever. She goes out there, and there's a Buster's towing guy actually hooking up our car at that moment. She runs out there, opens the door. Please don't take my car. He drives off with the car while Amber's got the door open and she's trying to get into the car. I was so mad. This is how they are. They're punks, man. They're like the mafia. They're not the mafia. They're a legitimate business that has been authorized by the city of Vancouver. But they act like the mafia. As soon as they get a call, they rush to your car because they want that money. What's going on? They rush because they want that money. They're going to take your car away as fast as they can. Even if you're sitting in it, they're going to take it away. And then if you try to argue with them, there's no point. They are you go down and they're like slumlords. There's no way you're going to get anywhere with them. You got to pay them the maximum amount of money or you're not getting your car back ever. They have authority from the government to take your car. And how does that make you feel? Those of you who raised your hands, how do you feel when they take your car? It's your car and they took it. And you can't get it back unless you pay them. You feel incredibly powerless. You feel like you've been wronged. And like there's nothing you can do about it. This is how people felt about tax collectors. The only part of this analogy that doesn't quite work is the tax collectors were a little bit worse because they had actually betrayed their nation. They were working for the hated Romans. We don't normally hate our city governments, right? You don't walk around thinking, I hate the mayor of Surrey. I can't stand him. I wish someone would come and defeat him with an army. No, you don't think that. But they did back then. So the tax collectors are just like Buster's Towing or Unitow, but they are working for the hated Romans. And this guy, Levi, has got his shop set up right there on the side of the lake. Why? Because that's where everything's coming. That's where the marketplace is. That's where everybody brings the produce that they've raised at home, the sheep that they have, the goats that they have. That's where everything comes in right across the lake. And so you've worked hard to raise all this crop. You're already paying a tithe to the church, a tax to the church for the government to run. And you get there, and this guy, who's supposed to be one of your countrymen, is taking away your stuff. And you feel totally powerless. Because if you don't do what he says, he's got some thugs with him. And they're going to beat you up, or they're going to force you to give him your stuff. And if you somehow escape them, he's got the Roman centurions who can come and enforce things. They have the government behind them. So people hated these guys. It wasn't like they were necessarily the worst guys in the world. Levi probably wasn't super rich, but he felt very cut off from society. He was on the margins in a lot of ways. He wasn't a guy who was going to show up at church because he was rough. Because he was somebody that people didn't like. If he walked into church, what do you think would happen? Everybody in church is going to look at him. There's Levi, the son of Alphaeus. Yeah, he took my goat last week. Now he wants to sit next to me in synagogue. No, that ain't happening. He's a bad person. And Jesus doesn't tell him to stop the bad stuff he's doing. He doesn't try to reform him. He just says, Levi, come and follow me. And you got to realize at this moment, that is an incredible honor. Jesus is a rabbi. He has a highly respected position in his society. Even though some other rabbis are fighting with him, the regular people look up to him very highly. Not only is he a rabbi, he's the most popular rabbi in the entire region right now. Everywhere he goes, thousands of people flock to him. And by calling Levi, he's not just saying, come with me to dinner at my house. He's saying, come be my student. Come be trained underneath me, and I'll show you a whole new way of life. He's saying to him what he already said to Peter and to Andrew and to James and John. Come with me and I will make you a fisher of human beings. I'll make you a fisher of people. I'll show you how to draw people out of the useless life that they're trapped in and draw them into a new life with God. I'm going to train you to be like me. And Levi at that moment is so astonished by this honor that Jesus would go to him, a bad person, and call him to a great position, that he leaves everything behind and follows Jesus. I'm going to leave it all behind and follow you. He goes to his house with Jesus, and did you see what happened next? It doesn't tell us who calls the banquet. It doesn't tell us that Levi invited a bunch of people over. It just says that other people from his crew, right, from Buster's Towing, other Buster's Towing guys, all start showing up at the house like crazy. It's like a Buster's Towing convention because they all want the same thing. This incredible rabbi is going to honor Levi, the towing guy, then maybe he'll honor me too. Maybe he would accept me into his church. No one else will. So they flood to his house because there's a chance for them. There's a chance for them to enter into a new kind of life. And Jesus doesn't for a second try to kick them out. And when these rabbis, these other rabbis, the Pharisees and teachers, they come to him and they say, why in the world would you eat with these bad people? Jesus is standing there looking at them. You have entirely missed the point. The whole purpose of you being a teacher of the Bible was so that you could find people who were sick. You could find people who are going the wrong way and help them come back. And instead, you're cutting them off because you require that they look a certain way before they come in. You require that they stop smoking or don't smell bad or don't be quite so ugly or stop being so mean before they walk in. No. This is what Jesus says. No. We draw them in and the Spirit of God will change them. We show them love. That is the way that it's done. Second point for your bulletin. Don't let the rules get in the way of the point. No, that's the third point. Second point is this. Jesus is looking for bad people, not for good people. Notice that he actually says that. I did not come. He doesn't just say, I'm also here for the bad people. I'm here to gather all people, and I'm also here for the ones who are bad. He says, it's the sick who need a doctor. I did not come to call good people. I came to call bad people. Think back to that illustration at the beginning. Jesus has shown up. He's like the dad coming home to the party, the wild party that's been thrown at his house while he's away. Things have gotten awful inside this party. He's disguised himself. He's got the police outside ready to take it down. He walks into the party and he's looking for people who want to join him. Who wants out? He wants to take down the instigators. He wants to take down the people who have allied themselves to this party, and this is where they really want to be, is doing all this evil stuff. But those who want out, he wants to help them. Now let me ask you this. Who is most likely to want to join him? In the scenario that it's a party at the house, is the person who's the center of the party, the life of the party, everybody loves them, they're doing beer bongs left and right, this is the best thing, are they going to want to join him? If he walks up to that person who everything's going great for them, and he asks them to join him, they're going to say, no, get out of here. I don't even know who you are. They're going to make fun of him. They're going to kick him out. They're going to persecute him. The people who are going to want to join are the people on the margins. The people who've been hurt by that party. the people who are scared of what's happening, the people who have been socially isolated and kicked out, that's who's going to want to join him. And it's exactly the same today. It's exactly the same in the day that Jesus was there. There was a huge obstacle to rich people, to people who had a great social position, to people that everybody loved and thought were good people. There's a huge obstacle, tons of huge obstacles to them actually turning and following Jesus. They're going to have to give up all the great stuff that they have to follow him. It's going to be harder. Also, they start to think that they're good. When everybody comes to you and says, you're awesome, you did such a great job, you are amazing, you have such good skills, how do you start to feel? I start to feel like I'm awesome. I'm amazing. I have such great skills. Everybody loves me. I'm a good person. What happens when things go bad in your life? You're depressed. People hurt you. You get sick. Bad things happen to you for no reason. What do you start to think about yourself? I'm bad. But the truth is, we are messed up on the inside. When we feel beat down like that, we are stuck in depression and discouragement, we are actually closer to the truth. Now, there's a danger that truth gets twisted and it holds us down forever. But we're closer to the truth than when we think we're so great. So when we are down and discouraged and you feel like my life is awful, this is the worst ever, I am nothing, don't be discouraged. You are close to the truth. All you need to do in that moment is turn to Jesus with that energy, with that fire that says, I want something else. There's got to be something more than this. And when you do, he will say, I am willing to make you clean. He will grab hold of your hand. He'll say, yeah, you are messed up. Now come follow me. And he will be able to use you, despite the fact that you're messed up on the inside. As he helps heal you through that process, he'll be able to use you to bring many people to know him. Where the person who thinks they are good, he can't use them because they think they're good. They haven't reached the first step. Jesus is looking for bad people because really all of us are bad people. Just some of us don't think so. Jesus is looking for the people who know it. And those people have an amazing opportunity. Oh man, we got to wrap up. I could go a lot longer on this one, but I won't. I'm going to leave you with an illustration. The last point for your bulletin is this. Give your life away in following Jesus. Give it away. In the first couple hundred years of the church, of Christians, people following Jesus, there were many plagues. There were two big plagues that struck the Roman Empire, where somewhere, they were actually almost as bad as the plague that hit in the Middle Ages, right? The Black Death. They killed somewhere near a third of the people in the Roman Empire. Imagine that, a disease that strikes your community and 1 in every 3 people is dead. Only remember, it's an age when there's no soap. People don't know what germs are. They don't actually know. They recognize that the disease is contagious in some way, that it passes from one person to the next. But they don't understand how, and they don't know how to stop it. Here's what happened in the Roman Empire with the vast majority of people. When your family member got sick, you took them and you kicked them out on the street. Because the whole rest of your family was going to die and you didn't know how to stop it. Think how terrifying that would be. When a plague struck a city, the best doctors in the cities would flee for the country because they didn't know how to stop it, and they were afraid they were going to die. In those couple hundred years after Jesus came, you know what Christians, a very small minority at first, of followers of Jesus, you know what they did? When people were kicked out on the street by their own family, they went and picked them up and carried them home and took care of them. And many times, they got the disease and died from it. There are hundreds of recorded cases of a Christian, a follower of Jesus, picking up someone who was going to die in the street of this disease, nursing them back to health. They lived, and the follower of Jesus got the disease and died. They gave up their own lives to save people who weren't even part of their family, who weren't even part of their church. These were pagans. The Christians weren't abandoning each other. What do you think that person who had been saved and nursed back to health by someone, a stranger, who had then died as a result of it, what do you think they felt like at the end? They felt just like that leper, didn't they? There is someone who loves me, and there can only be one explanation for why they love me. No one could do this unless God were living in them by his Spirit. They gave up their lives, but they entered into such greater life through it. They were used so powerfully by God to change the world. And that is an image of what we need to do today. Jesus is not just saying, you see it in the book of Mark, he's not just saying, I came here to save you. He did come here to save you, but he also came here to call you. He came here to save you and then to call you to join him in his mission, to go out to the bad people. We have to be careful and we have to be wise. There is a side there. But he is calling us to go to the bad people, the people that we don't want to be around, as he leads us, to be willing to reach out and touch them, to be willing to be used by God to make them clean. And if we are willing to follow that call, it will cost us, maybe it will cost us everything. But there is no better investment. There is nothing better you can do in this life. Your life's going to end anyway. It's almost over. Come on. It goes by in a blink. There is no better thing that we can do with our lives than to give them away so that we could be used by God to draw the world to him. Let's continue in prayer.